the meeting to order. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for the purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public community meeting. There is a time for public participation during the regular meeting. Mrs. Petter, roll call.
Mrs. Wider.
Here.
Mr. Simons.
Present.
Mrs. Cleveland.
Here.
Mrs. Moore.
Here.
Mrs. Kessler.
Here.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next is approval or revision of the agenda.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second. It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons.
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland.
Yes.
Mrs. Moore.
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler.
Yes.
Mrs. Wider.
Yes. Motion passes. Next is recognition of visitors, and we have one visitor, Leisha Thrower. Is she here? Oh, okay.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Leisha Thrower, and my daughter Jaya Thrower is a 7th grade student at Princeton Community Middle School. I am here today because I have serious concerns about the space available at the middle school and the high school. I would not be the parent or advocate that my daughter needs and deserves if I did not address this issue. Before my daughter transitioned to the middle school, I met with staff and toured the various classrooms. I was surprised and dismayed to see that rooms in the library had been transformed into makeshift classrooms for students with disabilities. I mentioned this to building administration and was told that the middle school simply did not have enough space and there were no other options for students. I explained then that the optics of students with disabilities being relegated to the library were unfavorable. I remember leaving that meeting and hoping that Jaya would not have a class there in 6th grade. Unfortunately, she was assigned to a math class in the library last year. I was hoping this would not happen again. However, that hope was in vain. She does not have one class in the library this year. Instead, she has three. Three of her academic classes will be in the makeshift library classrooms. Those rooms are insufficient for learning. They are small and cramped. They are not a part of the school classroom community. The library is a space that is open for others to enter and utilize. I can only imagine how loud it can get with students in and out of the space and the programming that must go on in the library. And that is where my daughter is supposed to spend 3 bells a day. Those rooms feel punitive. They seem like an afterthought. If I didn't know what they were being used for, I would have thought it was a room for small groups to work on projects or for students to serve in-school suspension. Students with disabilities often need more space and less distraction, yet they are forced into small spaces that are open for the entire school community. I appreciate that there are issues with space at the middle school. This likely presents a multitude of challenges. That being said, relegating students with special needs to the library is not the answer to solving those issues. The district is showing no signs of population decrease. In fact, all signs point to continued increased enrollment in the district. Artisan Village is being built on what used to be Tri-County Mall, and they are planning for 2,600 residential apartments. What happens when there are even more students at the middle school and the high school? Will my daughter be forced to have her classes in the school lobby? While there might be valid reasons for using the library as a classroom space in certain situations, it should not be the primary location of academic classes for the duration of a school year. How is this ensuring that students with special needs have access to appropriate learning environments that cater to their individual needs and promote inclusivity? I am here today because it is clear that Princeton has a space issue. And my question to the board is this: what is Princeton's plan to deal with the lack of space? How will Princeton ensure that students will be in classrooms that are appropriate for their education? What is being done to ensure that all students in the district will have appropriate learning environments that are a part of the school community? The answer to solving this issue is not by placing with students with disabilities away from the school community. When we consider the needs of the most vulnerable amongst us first, everyone wins. My daughter enjoys her time at the school. She has been very fortunate to have had strong teams working with her, but I want to be clear. Our positive experience over the past 9 years does not diminish what I consider to be wholly unjust. I do not have the answers. I do, however, believe that the district can and should do better for my daughter. I believe that Princeton City School District can and should come together to find an equitable solution to this spacing situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you pass that down for him? Thank you. Next is recognition of student participation in staff opening day convocation for the 2023-2024 school year.
Thank you. Friday, we had our convocation for the staff, and when we were putting things together to see what we wanted to do, Ms. Rod and I were talking, and I always want to have kids involved as much as possible. That's why we're here. My track record shows that, and that's really what we wanted to do. And with Ms. Roddy's help, we were able to get some kids, our students to come, a wide range of students, ages and things of that nature. I want to thank the parents for allowing them to be here. I know I've talked to a couple of the parents and said they really enjoyed that time, and it was like the teachers seemed like they had fun that day. They were excited. The energy in the room was great. So I want to say thank you to the parents. I want to say thank you to the young people for doing that for us. So now I know some of you a little bit, so I'll be looking for you when I'm in the buildings to say hi, and if you see me, you better say hi as well, please. All right? So when I call your name, could you please come up on the stage like you did the other day, okay? Wesley Anglin. Jayla Bradshaw. Nora Fogelson. Malindy Green. Charlie Hawkins. Leah Hawkins. Jada Jett. Valerie Lopez Bondazu. Priscilla Lopez Bondazu. Sophie Roberts. Devin Simpson. Zalia Walton. So I do have some certificates for you I want to give to you, and then we'll get a picture.
He says he'll give him the certificates and then we'll get it.
So he didn't go.
And what these students did the other day was they told us their name, grade, told all the teachers that it's a big time being up there for us, that their grade, where they went to elementary school, where they go to elementary school, and also what they love about Princeton. Thank you. So let's get a picture real quick here.
Next is recognition of Mallory Jones from Lincoln Heights Elementary.
Thank you. Miss Mallory Jones, first grade teacher at Lincoln Heights Elementary. We honor her for being named the Adopted Class K2 Teacher of the Year for the 22-23 school year. Now, I don't know Miss Jones very well. I met her that morning when we had a nice breakfast and an event that morning. However, talking with Mr. Burton, former superintendent, and her principal, Mrs. Bailey, she is fantastic. She is great with our young people. And I look forward to coming to Lincoln Heights here real soon and checking out all the great things you do. So we appreciate you and congratulations.
Congratulations again. Next is recognition of Tricia Roddy, District Communications Director.
Well, what can I say here? Ms. Roddy has been instrumental in my transition in helping me understand some things and some way we do things here and some things I want to make adjustments to. She is a nonstop worker. I even told her, you have to take a little time off. I need you now. You can't be here all the time. But she has been fabulous for me and for this district, more importantly. And I appreciate you. We appreciate you. I'm going to speak for the district because we know what you do. We know how much you care about the district and the community. And every time we talk, I get a little nugget of new things to learn about the district or about Sharonville or about a certain building or a certain kid, and I really appreciate that. So we spend a lot of, have spent and will spend a lot of time together. So it's nice to have someone that I feel like loves kids as much as I do, and you make us look good. So she had won the 2023 Publication Digital Media Excellence Awards. It was in St. Louis, July 16th through 19th, for her Princeton City School Quality Profile, Bikes in Action e-newsletter, and Blink 2022 Pride of Princeton Marching Band. And something good about this is I knew before she knew I knew, because there was someone else out there that sent me the information, so I snuck it out on her. She knew I was going to put it out. So we want to celebrate her, and we thank you, and I look forward to continue to work with you.
Hey. Yeah, we get a picture with you. Come around here.
Next is approval of the consent agenda.
Consent. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. District business, approval of the July 2023 financial report.
I move to approve the July 2023 financial report as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
I want to call the board's attention to an additional item in the financial report. There's an annual item that we approve. It is required by the auditor of the state and ORC code, and it is a listing of all our commercial paper, everything we've purchased and sold, and the income earned from that. It's a once-a-year thing. We did it last year, and I then, after the board approves it, I have to send it to ODE and the auditor of state so that we are in compliance. And that full report is attached there. The other things, again, let's look at our COVID report, our ESSER expenses. ESSER 2 is just almost in the books completely. I have a mere $30,000 of open purchase orders left, so we're working hard and fast to get those all paid out. The goal is first check run in September so that we can get the final report to the state at the end of September. The 018 district donation/rebate fund, I've reset that for this fiscal year, so now at the top you see what we've started the fiscal year with and the activity for July. You will notice an increase over the last several months in donations. July is typically a month where our corporate sponsors all send their checks in. Another thing, we have received, I think $6,000, $7,000 in donations for the Heritage Festival. So that's very exciting, and a good number of donations, not very much expense out of that fund right now. So it looks really good for July. The credit card report, the other investment reports are included, and the monthly report for July is, July is as quiet of a month as we can get in our world in the treasurer's office. Typically, a lot of people that we work with are gone on vacation, and it's not a big revenue month. This month I just wanted to let you know, last year in July we did receive property tax. We received it the first week in August, so that's the little drop you'll see. Last year we received almost $22 million in July. This year we got $23 million the first weekend in August. So again, that's all a timing thing until we get to the final settlement of property taxes. But other than that, the July financial report is solid, looking good.
Is there a motion to approve the financial report?
We have that.
We
We have
had
that.
that.
Oh,
Now we
okay,
have to
I'm
have a
sorry.
vote.
Now we have to,
Yes.
I apologize.
Mrs. Moore,
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes,
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland.
Yes.
thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of delegate appointment for annual business meeting.
I move to approve the delegate appointment for the annual business meeting.
And the delegate is?
I'll do it if no one else wants to.
Well, didn't you do it last year?
I don't know.
She
Which group is this for? OSBA?
yeah,
Yeah.
She
Yeah,
did it.
I am
Jody
the
was
delegate.
backup.
yeah, I did the backup.
I think
And
Not that she
Jody,
wants to.
Madam
were you
President,
alternate.
Jody, were you the
I
alternate
nominate
last
Gina
year?
Moore as primary and Jody Kessler as secondary.
Okay. Mr. Simons nominated her.
She said.
I second.
And Mrs. Cleveland seconded.
Mrs. Kessler,
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder,
Yes.
Mr. Simons,
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland,
Yes.
Mrs. Moore.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of the Princeton Support Staff Association contract effective July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2026.
I move to approve the Princeton Support Staff Association, PSSA, contract effective July 1, 2023 through June 30, 2026, as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Was that one Mary?
Yes.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded. So, Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of the resolution accepting donation for Safe Routes to School Improvement Project.
Move to approve the resolution accepting the donation for Safe Routes to School Improvement Projects.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes. Thank you. Motion passes. Next is a statement of compliance, Board Policy 6110, grant funds.
I move to approve the Statement of Compliance Board Policy 6110, grant funds as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of agreement with attendance K-12.
Move that we approve the agreement with attendance K-12 as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of service agreement with NovaCare.
I move to approve the service agreement with NovaCare as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? If not, Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is approval of Project A of the Facilities Master Plan.
I move to approve Project A of the Facilities Master Plan as presented.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes. Next is academic update.
And Mrs. Westwright will be talking through the academic update.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, back to school. That's tomorrow. So, what we wanted to do is give you a look at what our enrollment is as of today. So, our next slide, what we did is we really wanted to look at a 5-year comparison. We do a lot of talking about enrollment and planning for the number of students that we will be serving. So, right now, our teachers are planning to serve 6,001 students. You see that is going back to pre-pandemic into the 6,000 range. I believe we talked about this at the last board meeting. We also know at this point that school is just starting, so there's going to be numbers in here that those students are going to leave us. But these are the ones that right now are still currently enrolled in Princeton, and you see the trajectory. We're in that same range, but we are back over the 6,000, which is good news. We know we talked about decreasing enrollment after the pandemic. It looks like it is swinging back the other way. it is really important to note that our largest classes are at the high school. So our senior class is 501, our freshman class is 533, and our sophomore class is 580. All other classes are 400 to 300. So those are the big numbers that are leaving the middle school, going to the high school, and that is where we were trying to watch is to see if we would have a decline. So we don't know if it's jumping back up in the high school. It looks like it, but we know that those were large numbers as they came out of the elementary. So the elementaries are seeing a reduction in numbers at this point, but we can't really say until kids start to show up, because I know I was out at a lot of open houses this past couple weeks. We have a lot of smiling faces and full parking lots. So that is our information. What we're going to do is at the end of September, if I ask Mrs. Patty Fong, who does our Welcome Center enrollment, she'll give an update. So once we get a feel for after Labor Day, how many students really show up, we ask for our principals to do a count of actually who is in the classroom, because a lot of times people will not withdraw. We'll have to go after them to withdraw and enroll in another school. So that'll give us a better understanding. But for everything that we have right now, this is the number of students that we will start with tomorrow into Wednesday. The next slide we have is just what our breakdown is, what are our demographics here at Princeton. Right now we're looking at, you can read, I know I don't want to go over in too much detail, but we know we fluctuate, but 37% Black non-Hispanic, 34% Hispanic, 18%, and then we know that we're one of the most diverse districts, so we have other populations that are make up the Princeton community. Right now we're at 71% economically disadvantaged. That also fluctuates. There was a really big need to talk to our families again about filling out the free and reduced lunch forms, because during the pandemic, everything was free. And so now that we're coming out of the pandemic, that is not the case. So we're really trying to get people to fill out their final forms information to make sure that it's accurate as possible. Mrs. Perrin over the summer presented our English number learners, our numbers of English language learners, and we are at 22% for that, and then students with disabilities, 12.9 or close to 13%. So that is what Princeton looks like by numbers. If you go to the next one, here's a couple stats that we also talk about. I guess they're gonna pop up on their own. But completion of final forms, 85%, that's great for us. This is year 4 final forms, so we have not had so many completion of final forms. A shout out to our transportation department, John Fricky and Dr. Ronald Fosnall did a great job of encouraging people to fill that out so we can get the bus passes out. So the bus passes went out a few weeks ago. We are truly hoping that that eases some of the stress of the first day of school. There's always going to be something with transportation, but kudos to everyone to getting the students and families to fill out the forms, complete the forms, and get those bus passes out. So we're hoping for a smooth day. Last year, you know, we talked about moving to full-day kindergarten, and we talked how we're going to get those numbers to come up. So we have 305 full-day enrolled as of today, 37 half-day. Last year when we gave this presentation, our numbers were at 278, which was 247 all day and 31 half-day. So we are seeing an increase of people getting enrolled earlier. We want them at all as possible. Just so you know, last year we started August 8th, it said 278. We ended up with 418 kindergarten students. So that's why we talk about our enrollment. It kicks up after Labor Day and it fluctuates. So we do everything we can to get the kids in early, so they're with us from the first day of school. We're not always successful, but this year it looks like we're more successful with 342 starting on Thursday and maybe more. The next one we talked about is the Board of Education really wanted to make sure that our elementaries provided before and after school care. So our Champions program, we have 170 students, 17 students participating in that. You can see the numbers by location. The numbers of schools, if the school is not there, the students attend another school for that before school, and then they're transported to their home school. We could not get the numbers up everywhere, but our numbers have definitely grown tremendously. So we thank those partnerships. Those people from Champions are out working hard at our open houses as well, so this number could actually be increasing tonight as we speak. So we're really excited that our community really has valued this. It took us a while to get started, but you're seeing a big increase in the number of parents that are using the before and after school care. We still have 168 enrollment applications that are partially completed. So at this point, we don't know if they're really going to complete enrollment, if they change their mind, if they moved. So that's that number as far as kindergarten, where we say it's 347 right now, but it could be kindergartners that are in the queue. This means you didn't finish a residency. You're missing a piece that you can't enroll until we get that piece of information. So we still have 168 enrollment applications that are in pending status. The next slide is just something.
I see on the Champions that Woodlawn is no longer providing that, or Champions is no longer providing that to Woodlawn.
They are providing it. Those students are just transported from Heritage Hill to Woodlawn. There's a bus route. So then they cannot get the numbers for Woodlawn and Glendale to have their own. So there's a bus that will take the students. If the parents drop them off at Heritage Hill, then the bus takes them to Woodlawn and Glendale.
Okay.
Great question. What we're also going to do is give an update in September about McKinney-Vento. There's been a lot of different legislation, and in our community, this affects our numbers greatly. This is the students that are enrolling as homeless, or they are with us and then they move, let's say, out of the community, but that move is not by choice. That move is by circumstance. So there's a lot that our enrollment center is trying to do to make sure that our numbers stay as accurate as possible, that we support the students, but we also follow up, because we can't, some of our families maybe have stayed in McKinney-Vento for 2 to 3 years, and there's usually a limitation to the number of years you can claim homelessness. So we're trying to be as understanding as possible, but also making sure that our data and that we're doing what we need to do as fiscal stewards of the district to make sure that we have the proper students enrolled. So Mrs. Fong will definitely give a report with that, because we sent out information to families. Some of the families are still contesting that they are homeless, so we can't give you an accurate number of exactly how many students are reporting homeless and how many are now returning to other districts, because there's still a lot of that that's in flux.
When do you think you might have more complete data?
We're looking to give you, when we do the September update for enrollment, right after that, we'll see who ended up staying in the district, who showed the proper paperwork and it's strange to say they had to show paperwork to be classified as homeless, but as the years pass on, we just want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to, again, support the family. That's the foremost, but we also have to be fiscal stewards of the district. So I did leave time for questions, and like I said, I know this is new data, but I know you guys like to have an update of where we are, and then this way, when we give you the update in September, you'll know what we thought we were going to see and what we see, because I know we talked a lot about what the funding may be. So does anyone else have any questions for me regarding the enrollment?
What category would a student fall into who is an independent homeless student, say, for whatever reason, his or her parents no longer let him or her live at the home? Would that come under McKinney-Vento?
It could, yes,
Okay.
absolutely. That's what those situations are for.
And would you say we have a lot of situations like that?
I know when we were talking about it at our leadership retreat, she was talking about over 100 students that are, and it's over 100 that are classified with McKinney-Vento.
And that's
So-
not unusual for a school district, I guess.
It's not unusual for Princeton City Schools.
Okay.
So I think for some districts, it's probably unusual, but for us, we do have a lot of families that want to stay in Princeton. And so we also have families that are going through some pretty significant challenges. We have a lot of extended stay hotels in the area, so that's also what drives that number if people end up in one of the hotels. And that's one of the things she was talking about, is showing monthly bills from the hotels, like different things that we never thought we'd have to look at, because some people are really staying in the hotel, like that is where they want for their residency, or not what they want, that is what their circumstance is right now, and they stay there for an extended amount of time. And we have many of those in our community, many of those hotels.
But that's a good question, Gina. I know there was one last year, and it was long-term, but a counselor from the high school got the closet involved
Good.
to make sure the child was fed and clothed and all that kind of stuff. And I went to a couple IEP meetings, but
That's great.
I have a question about the half-day kindergarten. So which schools are offering the half-day?
That is a great question. I have them right in front of me because I don't want to forget. We still have half-day kindergarten at Evendale, Glendale, Sharonville, Evendale, Glendale, and Springdale.
Okay.
If the child and any of the other schools want to go to half-day, we will release them at the half-day mark, but we don't have designated half-day classrooms. Dr. Fosnall, did I get the right buildings? Okay. So we have designated halftime at Evendale,
Okay.
Glendale, Springdale. If there is a child at any of the other buildings that says, I want to leave at noon, we honor that request, and they do the schedule so that that child can be released at noon.
Okay.
Which brings up another question. So half-day is morning? There is no
Yes.
afternoon half-day?
There is no afternoon
Okay.
half-day.
Just wanted to clarify.
That was always our enrollment issue. Most
Yeah.
families would not sign up for afternoon kindergarten, so we decided to just do all of them in the morning, and then if the child wants to leave at any of the schools, they do have that right to do that.
And of course, there's no fee for kindergarten, full-time, full day or half-day, but what about preschool? Is there a charge to?
Yes, there's still the 290 fee on a sliding scale based on your income, and that's based on the state. All early childhood education in the state has a tuition component with it. So there are many of our students that do not have to pay. It's just based on your financial status.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Yes, the McKinney-Vento, can you put a dollar figure to what it costs the district? Or what we spend, or anything along that line?
I cannot. I know that the state does a funding formula that they do give you a percentage of money for homeless students through Title I. You know, I think sometimes Mrs. Petter has talked about that it's $6,000 per student, but we don't really have a formula like that right now. I do think that, to Mrs. Weider's point, Princeton takes care of our students, and so I think that people know that Princeton is a family and is a community, and they're gonna support them and try to support them. So it's really hard for people in hard circumstances to actually leave. But I do not have a number, but that's why we wanted to at least give you a number of students that we're claiming that we had, that are enrolled in Princeton under McKinney-Vento.
What about the transportation costs we may incur?
Yes, you all see that quite often when we come back and say we need additional funding for the different van services and the transportation. And that's one of the things she talked about, is that there's a feasibility study that comes with this as well. First we have to take the benefit of the child, but then if we have students that may be traveling from Kentucky and that van is coming every day. So those are the situations that we're trying to look into a little bit more carefully to see, is this truly what's in the best interest? If you're really not going to move back into the community, maybe you finish last school year out with us, but it's probably best that you go somewhere closer to your home. And then Princeton still may have to foot the bill for that, because they still would be a Princeton student.
Yes.
But at least they would be close to wherever they're currently residing. So,
On the page that mentioned diversity, I remember when I first got on the board, under different languages that we provide help to students for, I think it was up to 35 or 40 different languages. Has that increased, or is that about the same?
it fluctuates, but I think you're in that right range. I remember her saying 37 one year. I think what we'll do is, that is what the English learner, the teachers of English learners, that's the information they collect the first 30 days. They have to write the English learner plans for all of those students and find out the home language, and that's also in final forms. And that is difficult, though, to get accurate information, because final forms would have to be in all the languages. So our teachers do an amazing job, especially the teachers of English learners, asking those questions to see what is the home language and how can we support you. So we'll have a better understanding this year, but I feel like when she was up here in June, I feel like she said 37. But we'll give you an update once they do those forms over the first 30 days of school.
Thank you for this report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is treasurer's report.
We are registering for Capitol Conference for the Board of Education. I still need to hear from a couple of you about are you attending, and the hotel reservations that you need. The conference is November 12th through the 14th. I believe the delegate day is Monday, the 13th, Madam Delegate.
Thank you.
And heads up, I will have an adjustment to the appropriation and the certificate at the next meeting. And then that's the final temporary, and we'll have the final in September. That's all I have.
Superintendent's report.
Thank you, ma'am. First thing I want to say is thank you to everybody. The Princeton family has wrapped their arms around me and my family. Been very welcomed by the community, throughout the community, by kids, by the board, by my cabinet, which has been wonderful as I continue to learn some things with Princeton and see how things are done, and then adjust as needed to fit where we need to go. Since August 1, I've been a lot of places, been all over the place. Just a few. We had an administrative retreat, which was wonderful. I think our administrators did a great job. It was really quick, information intense. As some of you heard me say, I want to meet to win. I don't meet to meet, so I want to get the information. And then we went and had a little fun as a group, because we don't get to do that enough. But I thought that was really good, and people enjoyed that. I've been to talk to several of our outside people we work with. I met with Emory, I met with Life Touch, Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Urban, First Student, meeting with the Vineyard here soon to talk to them. They do a lot of things for us. Did interviews with the Hispanic press. So it's been a lot going on, and I love that. I'd rather stay busy. That's the way I like to do things. And then we had, last Friday, I was able to come look at our interns and say hi to them, and something I like to do, which I always would tell when I was a building administrator, I'd tell my assistants, I'd say, make sure your administrative assistant and your custodians you take care of. They're really important. So I was able to come over, and Mr. Cattell had a cookout for his custodians, and got to come talk and sit with them and have some conversation with some folks I may not see as often, but that was really good, and really warms my heart to see them, because I know how hard they work and don't always get the credit they deserve from everybody, but we're going to give it to them because we know they do that. Also, been passing out some backpacks, Operation Give Back, a few other places I've been to help people, and really all these things I've met so many great people, which I really is part of what I love to do, is be with people and make sure that we have earn that mutual respect. And then Friday we had our convocation, which I mentioned earlier went very well, and my plan at the convocation was to let the people in Princeton know who I am. I want them to feel comfortable to talk to me and do those things, and it was really funny as I'm going around the buildings after the convocation. A lot of people are like, I remember you like Ohio State, I remember you used to Bell Hay, I remember. So, kind of worked with what I wanted to do. I wanted them to know something about me, because sometimes I know before I officially took over, I had heard some people were afraid to approach me and say hi or whatever, and that's not how I'm wired. So I wanted to make sure they did that, and hopefully we accomplished that. So I look forward to continue to grow my relationship with the board and with my team, and as we go, we're going to do great things. So I appreciate you.
It was a tough search. We're glad you're here.
Well, I'm happy you chose me.
Mrs. Petter, the next thing on here is an executive session. Is that I don't know why it's there. Who asked for it?
We reserve in case something came up, as it did for several months in a row, but I don't think.
Session?
No, I don't think there's anything.
Anybody?
What did you say?
Executive session? We don't need one.
No, but can I speak for the board? I need to at least report out on our Great Oak stuff. Is that okay?
Sure.
Thank you. I just feel like if I'm representing the district, I need to make sure I let people know what's happening. Great Oaks, our students there, most of the students from Princeton attend Scarlet Oaks, starts on the 17th. We just met this past week on August 9th, and what's noted, I just wanted to make everyone aware that the Board of Directors approved the collective bargain agreement with the Great Oaks professional organization effective August 1st. This is the first time that we've had a bargaining unit at Great Oaks, and it represents our certificated K-12 teachers and/or secondary CTE instructors of Great Oak campuses and satellite programs. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that that has happened. The rest of the meeting, because school has not started, is similar to what we're doing tonight, which is just being in preparation for school to begin. I also wanted to state that I also attended on August 8th, the day before, the Southwest Ohio School Board Association meeting. It was held in Ripley, Ohio, at Miranda Nixon Winery. And what I wanted to make sure is that we're aware that we will be having our Southwest Region Conference October 12th at Laurel Oaks in Wilmington, Ohio. And we will be having a group from Princeton perform. So I would hope anybody who can, please come out and support our students. It's a great opportunity for them to be showcased to 177 school districts that are represented. So just wanted to make sure I stated that. And then last but not least, on Saturday, I had the opportunity to attend the Legislative Platform Committee meeting in Columbus with Ohio School Board Association and sent the board legislative updates. One thing I just wanted to make note of is that there's a lot of things coming down the pike that we as advocates for K-12 education need to be aware of. And so I would hope people stay on top of what's happening in Columbus, because it can and will probably impact all of us. So again, just wanted to make that statement for everyone. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Oh, I just wanted to thank Ms. Petter too for keeping us abreast of the ESSER funds, because I remember when we got all that money, we kept making sure that we spent it. And it's the fact that it's down to 30,000, that's really good news. Thank you.
Anybody else? If we're not having an executive session, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Mrs. Petter?
Mrs. Moore?
Yes.
Mrs. Kessler?
Yes.
Mrs. Wyder?
Yes.
Mr. Simons?
Yes.
Mrs. Cleveland?
Yes.
Thank you. We are
Thank you.
adjourned.